Welcome back. My next guest is Detective Sergeant Earl Lorence from the Clarkstown Police Department and the Rockland County Crime Analysis Center. Welcome, Earl.
Good morning.
So happy to have you on our program. You have been a longtime member of the Clarkstown Police Department. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And the Rockland County Crime Analysis Center that our residents don't know an awful lot about, but it's really an important job here within Rockland County with law enforcement and working with the community. And then we're also going to talk about some of the work of the Crime Analysis Center and a few trends that we're seeing, particularly as it relates to the opioid and fentanyl crisis that's out there. So just tell us a little bit, Earl, about your background, where you were born and raised, and how long you've been working for the Clarkstown Police.
Thank you. So I'm born and raised in New City, New York. My family moved here in the mid-'60s. Kind of leads into why I'm in law enforcement. My father was a Erie County Sheriff's Detective Sergeant back in the 50s and 60s. Moved here for better opportunities in alternative security solutions, burglar and fire alarm systems. So that brought me here. I went through all the Clarkstown schools. Clarkstown South, I graduated in the 80s. Went upstate to school in Plattsburgh, got my master's from Iona College in business administration. So I've born and raised, and now I'm working since 1996 in Clarkstown Police Department. Very proud of that. Been in law enforcement for actually next, I think Friday will be 30 years. So
congratulations.
Yeah, so that's I'm proud of that as well. Started with the Sheriff's Department, South Nyack Grandview Police Department, which no longer exists.
Right.
And now proudly serving with the Clarkstown Police Department for the last 26 years.
Right, and congratulations, you were just recently promoted to Detective Sergeant.
Yes, thank you.
Which is a fairly prestigious and important position within, the police department, not just a detective, but also sergeant, so you have the rank as well. Just going back, I think it's always important, particularly today with some of the issues that we're seeing with law enforcement, and I think we're kind of turning the corner, but we certainly had a couple of years there where there was a real impetus and a push and really a negativity, I think, towards the police. We didn't see that here in Clarkstown per se, but what made you decide ultimately to become a police officer?
I think it was, like I had mentioned earlier, it was the not the push from my father, but he always had, growing up from a young age, the respect of authority, the respect of the law enforcement in general. Grew up watching all the 70s cop shows, of course. But then I was just always had the interest in the back of my mind. I went to school for business, never went to criminal justice per se, but always had it in the back of my mind, and figured that I can apply my skills towards law enforcement, and that's really what got me here.
Right. And you also played a key role as a detective in a number of big cases. Without getting into too far off of a segue, but just tell us a little bit about a couple of the bigger cases you were on.
Yeah, a few years ago, I handled the homicide in Valley Cottage when the 81-year-old woman was brutally murdered in her home. That ended up being a TV show on Dateline and a couple of other cable shows as well. Prior to that, myself and another detective, Billy Fritz, handled the homicide in Valley Cottage again, where the teacher was brutally murdered in her apartment. There's been some crazy cases prior to that where we were involved in the Mary Nagel homicide in New City. That was, in all of these cases I mentioned, I was heavily involved with, but it was an entire team effort where the majority of the police department and the vast majority of the detectives were also involved.
Right. But we have I'm very proud of our police department. I think it's second to none. And I always tell people when we have the last recertification that took place, the team that came in, the gentleman who led that team, said that he had done, I think, over 75 certifications around the country, and this was by far in his opinion, the strongest police department out of all 75 that he had done. And he was raving. He said, you have nothing to be ashamed of with your police department. It's, far from that. It's actually one of the best in the country, which was great to hear, as you're going through an outside audit and the certification process. As the people are rating the department, they're talking about the exceptionalism of the department. So you've helped to be a big part of that, so we're delighted, and I want to thank you for that.
I appreciate that. It's nice to hear from outside agencies as well. When I talk to outside agencies, as I do pretty much every day, and I tell them what we do in Clarkstown as a matter of just everyday activity, they're astonished and they're surprised at the level of not only professionalism, but the level of activity that we have here, and just the pre-employment process and the polygraph, which I conduct for the town as well. They're amazed at the amount of work that goes on in that building.
Right. So Earl, let's segue now into the Crime Analysis Center. It's a unique collaborative between the Town of Clarkstown, the District Attorney's Office, and now some other policing agencies as well. Just tell us a little bit about the structure of the Crime Analysis Center and some of the things that they're involved with.
Yeah, thank you. Back in 2016, we had an idea. It goes back longer than that. We really had an idea that law enforcement can do things a little bit better. These last couple of years, as you led off with, has been a challenge towards that with bail reform and raise the age and things like that. We thought things could be done better anyway. The paradigm shift of law enforcement and the way we do business had to be shaken up a little bit. Historically, law enforcement has been very silo-oriented, where information silos resided within that police department. But we also know that criminals don't operate that way. Criminals cross borders. Crime crosses borders. So if one agency is not sharing information with another agency, you're really defeating the purpose, and you're working against what you really are out to, your goals of law enforcement, which is put away bad guys and girls. So we thought there was a better way to do that and to share information, and that's really what kind of jump-started this several years ago, and that was our goal. We've been putting out an intelligence briefing twice a week for the last several years. What we want to do is concentrate on the people that are doing the criminal activity. There's limited resources in law enforcement, we all know that. So let's concentrate on the very small percentage of the population that's causing the vast majority of the victimization in society. Right. So that's what we're out there to do. I think we're doing a good job with that, making all the police departments, not only in Rockland County, but in the region, more aware of what's going on here in Rockland and regionally.
Right, and so there's a fair bit of data analysis. You do predictive analysis as well, where you can kind of look at the trends, and I think you used traffic at one point as an example. So maybe use that as an illustrative point for our listeners and our viewers.
So as for traffic issues, say, we know that the vast majority of traffic accidents in the town of Clarkstown happen at 59 and College Avenue in Nanuet. We know that, and we know the time that it happens in the early afternoons towards the late afternoons in a 2-hour block. So we know that if we could put a law enforcement officer in that area around those times, that's a great use of law enforcement resources to reduce the amount of accidents during that time, speeding vehicles, vehicle and traffic incidents, being that is the number one complaint from the residents as well. So right. That helps cut down on the amount of calls and the complaints. It's really a 360-degree view and operation when you're thinking about it on a micro level as far as accidents.
Right. So we use the traffic accidents as an illustrative point, but you can do that with burglaries, you can do that with car break-ins, you can do that with drug overdoses, et cetera. So we kind of can start to see trends, and we can then start to deploy resources to try and address some of those trends.
Absolutely, and we do that. Recently we've had a rash of car break-ins, car thefts from homes, and a lot of this is education too. Especially with the car thefts, people are leaving their key fobs, their new key fobs in the car, so it's easier for them to come and just start the car the next morning. But the criminals know that, and they're taking the cars right out of the driveway in the middle of the night. It's not only just a Clarkstown problem, that is a regional issue that's going on. So some of it is education. It's a multi-pronged approach. The police can't do it alone, and I think you're doing a great job as far as with social media and this TV show, getting the word out to the public so they can become better educated to care for themselves.
Right. So let's kind of segue now into really the drug crisis, and I think it's multifaceted. And you supplied a report the year-end results for 2021, which were quite stark and alarming to me. It's something that I'm bringing up with the other town supervisors. I know we're having some conversations with the district attorney, and we're even hopeful that it might lead to other funding and some other advances. But maybe you could kind of break it down for us a little bit. The increases that we're seeing in drug uses, drug overdoses, drug deaths, and the rise in fentanyl across Rockland County and Clarkstown.
So last year, which is the number that everybody's referring to, and thank you for reading the report. We put this out not only once a year, but we put it out once a month. So we put it out to all of the local politicians as well as the administrators so they can get an eye as to what's actually happening. And so thank you first for reading it and actually delving into these numbers, because they are stark and alarming. And they have been for quite a while. Coming out of COVID, I think these numbers have been growing. And last year, the overdose deaths in Rockland was 61. Now, that is the number that everybody's talking about, a crazy rise. Clarkstown's number was 19 overdose deaths. The numbers are up drastically. The deaths for Clarkstown were up 58%. We can do better. We can do better.
So in Clarkstown, we went from 12 in 2020 to 19 in 2021, and we went, what, from 45 to 61, roughly,
Yep.
in Rockland County-wide.
Oh, yeah, so the overdose deaths are up 45% over last year.
Right.
And virtually all of it is due to the presence of fentanyl.
Mm-hmm.
That is the component.
And we're seeing that this is a nationwide trend as well, right?
100%. So I think you had mentioned at another discussion that we had that there were over 100,000 overdose deaths last year, and that is true, and that is the reason. The reason for that is fentanyl.
Right.
So a number that was released yesterday that you may or may not have heard on the news is that you're really playing Russian roulette when you're on the street buying drugs, whether it's cocaine or heroin or methamphetamine or whatever your drug of choice is if you're a user, because at least half of the presence of street drugs has fentanyl in it.
Right.
So you're really playing Russian roulette.
And just literally the amount of fentanyl, from what I was told, I've heard it explained by others. Literally, the date on a penny, that amount of fentanyl is potent enough to kill most adults.
If you Google image fentanyl, from fentanyl, they'll show you a capsule, a glass capsule, and it's literally 3 grains of salt. That's the size of the amount of fentanyl that will kill an average person.
And unfortunately, we're finding this laced in all types of drugs, including opioids, right?
Opioids, cocaine. Increasingly, in 2019 and 20, we saw a vast rise in the amount of fentanyl. Originally, it was only in heroin. And then last year and the year before, we saw a dramatic rise in cocaine. And now this past year, we saw it even presence in marijuana.
Right, which is alarming, and that's very disconcerting, because a lot of people then will think, well, we have Narcan, right? And Narcan's a great thing, and so people, there's a lot of people that are distributing Narcan. You can get it from your pharmacy. Different elected officials have been giving it out historically, and what have you. And Narcan saves lives. Tell us a little bit about Narcan, but some of the issues that fentanyl is bringing.
Narcan is a wonderful tool for law enforcement. I believe Clarkstown was the first one in the county to actually carry, and law enforcement-wise, carry Narcan to begin saving lives. It's become an everyday distribution, where it used to be like once in a blue moon. Now it's virtually every day that the officers are saving somebody's lives. Last year, countywide, I believe we saved 158 people with Narcan, 158 people with Narcan. But we also know that 20% of those people that we previously Narcan, that we saved, are going to end up dead because of the continued drug use.
Right.
So we know right off the bat, and talk about data analysis, we know that we could save 20% of the people that have previously been Narcaned we know we can target those for possibly avoiding death.
Right. So you break down those numbers. I mean, literally, we had 61 people die. So, this past year, 2021, across Rockland County. So 20% of that would be 12, right?
Yep.
There's 12 lives that potentially could have been saved had we were able to somehow get to them. And that's what we're hoping to do, maybe going forward. Tell us a little bit about what happens with when a person does have an overdose. What happens in terms of that? The police show up. What are some of the other things that take place with that?
So it can be a very volatile situation when the police show up at a medical emergency. It could just be a normal medical call that they don't know it's an overdose. Sometimes they do know it's an overdose, and they respond. Either way, they respond the same way. Make sure they're seeing security, especially if there's an overdose. They administer Narcan where appropriate, especially if the person's not responsive. Then we have to watch the patient to make sure that when they do come around that they're not violent. Many times the person that comes around, they've just been unconscious for a period of time. They just ingested a large amount of heroin and fentanyl. So we have to make sure that they don't come out of it violent against the medics who are trying to save their lives and against other police officers. So it can be a very volatile situation.
Right. And then the follow-up care would be that these the overdoses get reported to the county as well?
Yes, so we have a dedicated HIDA analyst, high-intensity drug trafficking area analyst that's paid for by the New York District Attorney's Office. It's been a wonderful help to us to watch the trends in drug usage over the years. That partnership goes back to 2016, so that's been a great help. But we get these reports almost in real time, and then we can report it back both to the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Health. The Narcan reports themselves go up to the State Department of Health. So there's a number of ways we can do to target the actual individual who needs help. It's not just numbers on a page. We think there's a better way, and that part of that better way is actually drilling down behind the numbers to see there's people. Each one of those numbers is a person. So we said, what can we do to help not only reduce the numbers, but really help the people that are behind those numbers? And that is get them targeted help by a mental health professional, by a peer, any number of ways.
Right, and that's hopefully one of the things that we're going to look to do to see if we can obtain some additional funding to try and bring in. I know the Department of Mental Health and Department of Health for the county is supposed to, they do some type of follow-up with, in the instances of Narcan saves, but again, more has to be done because it's Russian roulette, not just with the drugs that you're ingesting, but Narcan is only going to be as effective, each time that you use and you need a Narcan save, it becomes less effective, correct?
That's exactly right. We've noticed over the past 2 years especially that it used to take one dose of Narcan to bring somebody back, and now it's 2 or 3. I've seen 5 doses of Narcan to bring somebody back to life. So a cop can show up and he has like 2, maybe 3 if there's a third cop on the scene to bring somebody back. By that time, the medics are arriving. They could administer another one, but then they have the IV Narcan, which is obviously more high potent. Mm-hmm. And we're noticing because of the high prevalence of both the potency of the heroin itself, the underlying heroin is more potent, and in the addition of the presence of fentanyl, it's just making those people have a false sense of security that, oh, Narcan's going to save me. Oh, you have the Narcan? That'll be fine. It's really a false sense of security. Right.
And just one last thing, Earl. One of the statistics, and that's just recently come out, but some of the things we're looking at is we're seeing a lot younger. I was also alarmed just by the age range and the statistics of overdoses and deaths, and it hit every age demographic. I think that would be surprising for our viewers to hear. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a good point that you bring up. Of course, the age ranges that you would normally think of drug usage between 18 and 39, those are the peak years. But this goes across all age borders, nationality borders, geographic borders, and we put a map of the county out every week. It's called the OD map, and that pinpoints every location of an overdose and the whole county. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It just happens everywhere. So our age ranges, the highest is 18 to 29, and we've had people in their 80s overdose.
Right.
And because
multiple overdoses in their 80s and at least one death in their 80s in 2021. I found that so surprising. But then you would think if somebody's been a drug user for a period of time, statistically they may have survived. But that was alarming to me. And then the under 18, under 16 was pretty alarming to me as well. There's some numbers in there as well.
Yeah, so the people that are under 18, I think that's an age that we should start concentrating more, like the middle school age range, because they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So they're thinking that maybe they'll try cocaine once, or they'll try this pill once. Now there's a plethora of pressed pills out there, the fake pills that are just purely fentanyl. They're thinking they're getting like a party pill, and the kids are dying nationwide from experimental use.
Right, and that's one of the things that's been really concerning. I think there was even something just recently, within the last month or so, in Connecticut. They found fentanyl pills in like a middle school.
Yeah, and they're all over the place. And now with the marijuana and the edibles that you're seeing all over the place, things are just bound to change in that regard as well. And that's another concern that we're going to see down the road.
Right. Well, Earl, you're doing great work. Not only as a detective with Clarkstown Police Department, but frankly, in your role as leadership role with the Crime Analysis Center, because you're helping to bring a spotlight not just onto this issue, but many other issues. You do regular briefings in all the police departments, and you're putting together intelligence briefings and workups on a whole variety of issues. But I thought it was important for us to really talk to our residents about this. We're going to put some information up on the screen and at the end of the program so people know who they can reach out to if they've got an issue or a problem. And we're going to continue to try and educate our public, because this is really a tremendous concern. 105,000 people died in the United States last year from drugs. It was a significant increase. Every decade, deaths by drug overdoses have doubled since the 1970s. And these numbers here in Clarkstown, the 58% increase in deaths, and just the overdose numbers, over 38% increase countywide in just overdoses, where people overdosed and were revived. And that doesn't include, there's loads of people, presumably, and I know this from talking with our police and talking with our medics, there are loads of people that are out there that they get Narcan on their own, they get it from the pharmacy, whatever, and so people will get together, they'll use, and they may be revived, and then they may not even call the police.
Right, so that 61 death number is really the number, but the overall death numbers that are up substantially, that is an underreported number. So I would venture to say about 20% higher overall overdose numbers.
Right, agreed. Well, Earl, you're doing great work. I want to thank you for it, and I want to thank you for being such a wonderful guest.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.